with Lovecraft, I do understand why these disclaimers are, because they are kind of shocking for someone in the modern day to read them.
Even he didn't like air conditioning.
Yeah, he was afraid of air conditioning.
he was a mess of problems.
Yeah, that guy had issues, man.
Welcome to Pint Cellar, everyone. I'm Jarvis, and I'm joined with Hubrecht. How's it going, man?
Hey, everyone. It's all good. It's all going well for me. How about you, Lewis? How are things for you?
I'm doing good these days, I think. And yeah, it's fun to do another episode of Pint Cellar. And this time around, we're not recording this 2 months in advance.
That's good.
Yeah, for the audience, we actually recorded our first 2 episodes 2 months before 2025 happened, for January. And I figured this, and this time around, whenever we record an episode, they're going to come out like a week later. It's not like you're going to be expecting us 3 months later. So hopefully we can get more episodes out this year, and let's see what season 1 brings. Yeah, and as the audience may tell from something like Pint Cellar, even though we talk about Warhammer and it's something that we have passion for, it's not something the podcast orbits around as compared with on air. Because, in this podcast, we want to talk about things like Catholic lore. We want to talk about mythologies, cryptids, and of course, Warhammer. It's just that we also want to talk about things that we find of interest or inspiring. And I figured for this episode, it might be fun for us to talk about one of our favorite writers. That is H.P. Lovecraft.
Ah, yes, the arch racist himself. Okay, that was a joke.
I know it's a joke, but some people just won't take it as a joke. It's fun to tease about. That's the thing, isn't it?
It's funny because
Italian herbs? No, thank you.
It's funny because Lovecraft, every time, in a lot of Lovecraft products, books with his stories, or role-playing games and things like that, they kind of are always giving these disclaimers about, hey, Lovecraft had some very extreme views, to say the least, even for his time. And
it's I wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, unless you're Italian or Irish,
yeah,
or Polish or Ukrainian or Yugoslavian or Lithuanian, unless you're American,
or Turkish
or Greek.
and about these disclaimers, I never I understand why they're put in his works, because even we said, even for his time, Lovecraft had some harsh views about race. But I've never been a fan of having a classic work come with a preamble of oh, this is the reason why this work sucks, actually telling you, oh, it actually sucks. But with Lovecraft, it's kind of a bit more understandable. But I must say, there are some people that
here's, I will say,
do this very badly.
Here's the thing too. There's people who defended worse writers for less. I'm just going to say,
yeah, yeah.
But it's the crime of Lovecraft is that he was an ass, and he would probably say yes. And he did reflect on this near the end of his life, that he reflected that he was an ass in life, right?
Yeah.
And it's well, here's the thing too. It's you can't really expect him to be, quote unquote, a good person, because both his parents were put into mental asylums, 1930s mental asylums.
Yeah. Yeah. And that explains a lot of the madhouse horror that involves the stories, now that I think about it.
Yeah. Or him living near poverty most of his life. And it's I don't really expect him to be, cheery. Or maybe that's why some of his writings sort of have this not nihilistic, very better view of life.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that his stories do, take a dive into nihilism. That's
That's what I
kind
was
of
trying to
part of
say.
the
That's what I
horror.
was trying to say.
Yeah. But something that I never liked is that, like with Lovecraft, I do understand why these disclaimers are, because they are kind of shocking for someone in the modern day to read them.
He
Even
didn't like air conditioning.
yeah, he was afraid of air conditioning.
he was a
But
mess of problems.
yeah, that guy had issues, man. But here's the thing, like, since you're still publishing his work and you're still profiting from his work, and you went through all the trouble of publishing his work, it means that you're trying to make money from him.
You
B,
are
you
trying to
still
make money from him.
Yeah, you are trying to make money from him. B, you have an appreciation for the stories but do not like the author. Or C, both of them. And here's the thing, there are disclaimers like these that are done with respect, like, in the fact that, well, he had some extreme views, but here I am publishing his stories, and I still like them. So, that kind of like try to bridge that gap.
Or there's
ones that pretty much tells you how Lovecraft was a shit person and everything he did was shit and his life was shit and everything. Oh, by the way, give me money for profiting from his work.
Yeah, it's kind of like that overly sarcastic productions video on Lovecraft. I really tried watching the video, but it's like every time I return to it, I hear her bitterness with him, and even going childish and being like, hates progress, Lovecraft. And it's like, oh my God, you're so funny.
Yeah. Like oh, hey, Lovecraft hated black people. Like, jokes get like really old very quickly,
Someone from the 1930s.
We got it the first time, yeah.
Someone from 1930s New York? Providence?
Sorry. Yeah. Well, but whatever. Like, let's stop speaking about Lovecraft, baggage, and start thinking about his stories. So, how did you first come into? Oh, sorry, you're the one that leads here.
I do. I am the man of this house.
Look at me.
It's my show. No, it's my show
now.
But I will answer your question actually. So I don't really know how I really got into Lovecraft. I think it was more like Thawing the Frog sort of thing, where it's like, I hear a reference here and there, then I would find out that these references were from stories. And that's how I think I gradually got introduced to him. But I will say that when I was getting into him and see like the sort of influence he had in literature, I will argue that he's probably as impactful, in the genre that he created as Tolkien is with his. Because because here's the thing, it's like Tolkien basically created, high fantasy literature, and fantasy literature can be described as Tolkien-esque because of their inspiration, such as how, cosmic horror can be, Lovecraftian. It's literally named after their writers,
Yeah, I get it. And like, it's weird because, it's weird that a man managed to be this influential when you realize that most of what he wrote are, short stories that can be fit in a single volume. It's impressive how one can be so influential. Like with Tolkien, he wrote, he wrote the Hobbit and the complete Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and like it was several full works. And with Lovecraft is, like a single, short stories that can fit, that all of them can fit in a single volume,
Especially pulp fiction magazines. That's where they were found.
Especially pulp fiction magazines, yeah.
And it's like, these were cheap things that you can easily throw away. And if it weren't for his friends to keep them alive, it would probably just be a, bookmark within, literature history that maybe some people won't really know about. But it's because of his friends that they kept his works alive. That's how, Lovecraft basically exploded after death, where his influence became immortalized, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's funny because here we just said how much he was kind of an ass in life, and that he even reflected on that. But apparently, he was a very likable ass because, I mean, you'll if you have friends that are willing to keep your work alive after you passed on, I mean, it means that people respect you a lot or had really deep appreciation for you. And I remember that when Robert E. Howard tragically committed suicide.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, and you know, Robert E. Howard is the other giant of pulp fiction. You know, he's the
Hmm.
creator of Solomon Kane and Conan. Uh, and you know, Robert E. Howard has these moments of when he out Lovecraft in some of his stories, in a
Hmm.
way. But he wrote a eulogy for him, and it's on the preface of one of the Solomon Kane collections. I have it right here. I don't know.
Oh,
We should
awesome.
read it or something. Yeah, like, and it's actually very beautiful. Like, you would think someone who wrote such nihilistic things, you know, couldn't write something so beautiful, but it's one of the most, you know, it's a very beautiful eulogy.
That's actually really nice, actually, and that
Yeah,
kind
and I was shocked. Like, I was when I was reading that. Sorry for interrupting you. Like, when I was reading that, I was like, "Oh, that's so pretty. Who wrote this?" And when I look at the back, written by H.P. Lovecraft, and I'm like, "Wait, what? Howard is you know, old H.P. is the one that wrote this, but that this doesn't sound like him."
yeah, and that tells you that um his stories are worth remembering and they are worth caring for, and it's like not many people get that kind of privilege.
Yeah,
And it's like,
agreed.
yeah, Howard was an ass, but he didn't eat babies.
Yeah.
You know how I appreciate Lovecraft, and you know I have 3 different volumes or omnibuses of his works, and yeah, those are pretty awesome. They're basically collector's items for me. But I'm interested in how you actually got introduced to Lovecraft. I'm curious on that.
Right. So it's in a way similar to yours in the sense that, you know, I was first, s- you know, I was, you know, I was made aware of Lovecraft through exposure of references to him through other media, you know, like even back when I was a kid, and like in the, you know, there's Lovecraft references everywhere, like
Hmm.
the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy had Lovecraft references.
Oh, and you know, I want to say right now, go on this tangent. There's like Scooby Doo, Ghostbusters, South Park.
yeah,
It's
Ghostbusters, South Park, yeah, and you know, and I think that the first time I was really exposed to maybe not Lovecraftian literature, but Lovecraftian, you know, a Lovecraftian like creature design or, you know, creature aesthetic
mhm.
was with the Hellboy movie. You know,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, I've told you, both you and Badger, that Hellboy is one of my favorite, you know, one of my favorite comic books of all time. You know,
Hmm.
yeah, and you know, the comic has quite a lot of Lovecraftian influence. You know, the one of the main villains is essentially a Lovecraftian entity with mixed with a biblical entity, basically.
I love that
You
kind of
know,
like
it's
combination. You know,
yeah,
that's Lovecraft
yeah,
mixed
yeah,
with hell.
yeah, pretty much. Because in a way, you know, hell is cosmic horror that's halfway done, but you know, since you know God is part of the equation, you know, it's not so scary anymore. But you know, like a very Lovecraftian thing would be like, oh, hell exists, demons exist, but you know, angels and God do not, you know, and so that's the only thing that ever has been, you know. So, you know, your life and existence is all a big joke because everyone's damned anyway. You know, things like that, which is kind of a bit, you know, something that sometimes Warhammer 40K implies, but you know, there's the whole issue about, well, what does the Emperor do with the souls of the dead? Well, you know, well, tangent. But, well, the Hellboy movie. You know, the Hellboy movie is not exactly what you would call Lovecraftian horror because it's not a horror movie. It's a action movie.
Mm-hmm.
But the creatures with tentacles and with tombs with ancient glyphs in a language that no one has spoken for 10,000 years.
It's Lovecraft.
That sort of thing. That's Lovecraft. That's very, very Lovecraft. So it came to a point where, sorry.
Oh, no, go on.
And it came to a point where, I will start hearing like, oh, Cthulhu this, Cthulhu that. And I was like, okay, what the hell is that? Like, that's such a weird word. And then I'd realize, oh, those tentacle things that sometimes show up in cartoons and movies, those are Cthulhus. Oh, no, Cthulhu turns out is just one entity. Ah, okay. And where does that come from? Oh, it's from an author called H.P. Lovecraft. Once I looked into it, I went into the rabbit hole and I've been a fan ever since.
It sounds like a story in a Lovecraft. Well, it sounds like something in a Lovecraft story. So on finding out what Cthulhu is, and they uncover more of the mystery. It's lost innocence.
Yes,
that's
when he hears a rumor, starts investigating, then someone warns him, "You will go insane if you go on, but you don't care because you must know, you need to know," and then you go mad.
And also, we were actually just talking about this before we start broadcasting. And guys, I swear we will talk about some of his stories, but we're also talking about Lovecraft's influence. So be patient. But that famous PS4 game is something you and I both enjoy, and something I have yet to complete, but I'm still finding a lot of fun out of it. And it's Bloodborne. It's like
Bloodborne.
It's like what I love about this game is that it does start off as like gothic horror with like, the werewolves and the beasts and how you're like in London. Yeah, that is a horror story. But but as you progress through the game, it becomes Lovecraftian horror, and I love it.
Yeah. First of all, I must say, as someone who's a big fan of all the Souls games and Souls-likes, type of storytelling that they have and everything, I must say that Bloodborne is a huge, I'm very bad at picking favorites, but Bloodborne could easily be the best Souls because of how unique it is.
Yeah.
And its lore and presentation. There's not another game like Bloodborne. There's 1,000 games about in a medieval Renaissance-ish fantasy setting, but a gothic Victorian London, with trench coats and tricorns and gunpowder with werewolves and then star spawn of Cthulhu mixed in. There's no other game like that.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I would say my favorite weapon so far is like the saw spear. I say
saw
that's
spear.
Yeah, I think it's like the saw cleaver, but it's a spear.
Yeah, it's the longer one, right?
Yeah. Or that
my favorite. Oh, go ahead.
Or also that one weapon that's kind of like a ball on a stick, but it's electric.
Oh yeah, what was its name? I don't remember. I used to know the names of all the weapons in that game. The mace with the electric mace, basically.
Yeah.
My favorite weapons are. I'm not gonna count the saw cleaver because that's kind of like one of the first weapons that the game gives you. So I always, default to that at the beginning. But my favorite weapon in the game would be the Moonlight Greatsword.
Oh,
and the Moonlight Greatsword, and I would say what's the name? Oh, the Kirk Hammer. The Kirk Hammer.
Yeah, that's good. And we were even talking about bosses in the game, and I was like, so I just killed King Charles, then I fought against Cthulhu's daughter, and not even bother really saying their names, and it's like, I fought Prince Charles at last.
Martyr, Logarius, and Ebrietas, daughter of the Cosmos. Those are the names of the bosses, in case you're wondering, audience.
And the giant spider thing.
Oh yeah, back your spider rom. Here's the thing, what makes Bloodborne, and I'll talk about my favorite bosses in a moment, but as you said earlier, Bloodborne starts like a gothic horror story that switches switches to a cosmic horror story.
Mhm.
And it's, I think, it's one of the best, switch, switcheroos in gaming in a way,
Yeah.
because when the game was coming out, I still remember it. There was no indication about that. We only knew that, oh, it's about hunting beasts. It's about hunting beast. They kept the they kept the game's lore very vague, like even more vague than most Souls games, and those tend to have very vague lore that you're supposed to piece as you play, right?
Mhm.
So when you finally kill back Rom the vacuous spider, that's when the switch happens. You start seeing signs of it, but that's when it definitely happens. When the how does it say? When the red moon hangs low,
Yeah, and you see like even before you fought Rami, it's like you saw like these insect humanoids with like 1,000 eyeballs in their heads.
Yeah, you
It's like,
start seeing that some of the beasts are not just werewolves. They're not just lycanthropes. They have, there's birds with dog heads and uh, dogs with bird heads. You see people with spiders coming out of their heads, and
you see
with
like
snakes coming out of their heads. Witches too.
you see like small blue people.
Oh right, yeah, I remember those too. Those are experiments, I think. But yeah, and you start seeing things that clash with the gothic horror aesthetic. Because that feels, that are very easy to see because they're kind of out of place. And then and from there it's just tentacles, eyeballs, and oh the
British
and
slang. And also British people
what was
going
that?
more and also British
Yeah, and
people
British
going
people,
mad.
British people going mad at you. Um, as to my favorite bosses in the game, I would say Ludwig the Holy Blade.
Mhm.
Obviously, I enjoyed when I first played it. I enjoyed the Father Gascoigne boss fight a lot,
Oh
actually,
yeah.
because it has the mechanic of the music box.
And I didn't find that out till later.
You didn't find that out?
I didn't know.
No? Oh man.
So that shows
must
I
have
have
been
more skill then. That I was able to beat him without the box.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. But like that's kind of like a very good Easter egg, or very good lore tidbit.
Mhm.
Oh, and I remember the I don't know if you had trouble with this one, but the one boss that I had trouble with the most, that boss that you die again and again and again, and you develop a pattern of dying to it, and you spend all day, all afternoon trying to win. And you get frustrated, you turn off the game, you come back later, and
Watch
now
the
you're worse
boss.
because you lost. What?
Watch the boss.
Blood-starved beast. The one that poisons
Oh
you.
yes, I know
The
that one.
blood-starved beast. Yeah,
That
fuck
was
that
a
guy.
pain in the
Yeah.
beginning, yeah. But
Yeah.
secret is Molotov cocktails and
Yeah,
grinding it,
Molotov cocktails.
locking in.
Oh, and having pills.
Yeah, it's like also locking in. It's like die, 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 and I kill him. I was like,
No, but I
yes.
hate poison. I hate poison bosses. I hate them. I hate bosses that slowly poison you. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
enough that I have to dodge his attacks. I have to stay away from it too. Fuck.
Or the
Like,
ones that turn you mad.
oh yeah.
And-
But I do remember though that when I finally beat it, I literally jumped to I jumped so high that I could touch the ceiling. Like I was so happy. I felt so powerful at that moment.
Yeah,
That I suppose that's kind of like the point of the Souls games.
yeah. It's like I was cheering, and my dad was like, "Shut up."
What the hell is this brat talking about?
And like, it's obviously you can't speed the game. Lois, just do it different day.
Yeah, but oh well, fuck the Bloodstarved beast, brought in hell. um, but yeah, and I think that Bloodborne is, if not one of the best Lovecraft, representations in fiction, other than, the short stories, it's close to it. There are some Call of Cthulhu games in which, you have
there's
a
plenty.
more, when which you're more like an active role in which you're kind of like an investigator, and it's more of a horror game, because in Bloodborne, of course, it's a horror-ish game, but you're not defenseless.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the great things about Bloodborne, is that Bloodborne manages to be scary-ish, kind of survival horror-ish, without doing the trope of like, well, you are it's scary because your character is a pathetic weakling that dies in 2 hits.
I do.
Yeah.
And I feel like we can talk about that when we get to one of his stories, actually. And I think it'd be time to actually do the conversation about this, right? We can go on for hours about all of his kind of stories that he wrote, but I figured today it might be fun if we got to talk about, our particular favorites and, grow conversations from there. And, it would be rather criminal if we didn't start off with one of his most famous stories, and one we just referenced just now.
Yeah.
And that's the Call of Cthulhu.
Of course. Call of Cthulhu is the Lovecraft story. I mean, his entire body of work is called the Cthulhu mythos, for crying out loud.
It's basically where, the foundations, I would argue, of, Lovecraftian horror would be made. The Lovecraftian mythology, Cthulhu mythology, say as you will. And
I'm not aware, is that the first story that what was the first story that he wrote? Because
it was
it's
not
the most well known, but I don't know if it was the first.
Well, it was not his first ever story. No, he wrote, plenty of stories before he got into, pulp fiction magazines. But there's this one he did write before Call of Cthulhu called Dagon. And that is like pure Lovecraftian, Cthulhu mythos without it being Cthulhu mythos.
Yet.
Yeah, it would later be part of the Cthulhu mythos, but it was basically kind of like the catalyst to Call of Cthulhu, because it involves like a sea monster, a person going mad, always thinking that the same
lost city.
Yeah. It was basically, Call of Cthulhu before it was Call of Cthulhu. And it is a pretty good story. I like it. It's just that it is Call of Cthulhu that everyone references through Lovecraft. There's countless video games and role-playing games named after this story. If you mention Lovecraft, you're probably thinking Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the first thing that comes to mind, honestly.
And, even comparing something like Cthulhu to like all of the other monsters within mythology, I think this one is more grounded, if that makes sense, because creatures like Yog-Sothoth or Azathoth, they're described as like these mass of tentacles and eyeballs and, chaos.
Madness. These abstract cosmic concepts, that are unfathomable.
Right.
That, even seeing a bit of it will make you go insane,
Yeah, whereas, Cthulhu, he's, a bit more grounded. It's like a giant humanoid with an octopus for a head and dragon-like wings. It's very more tamed he's very more tamed in looks compared to the other gods, but I also think that's something that's, most recognizable about Cthulhu, and something people will almost instantly think about more clearly when compared to Yog-Sothoth, because Yog-Sothoth is more of just tentacles.
Yeah, I get that.
Even though I might find, Yog-Sothoth more interesting, I think Cthulhu looks more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because Cthulhu is a creature that can be visualized, while Yog-Sothoth is, it has, artistic representations. It tends to, the description of what he is supposed to be, toe the line between creature and abstract concept,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the devil, in a way.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah. And, even then, Call of Cthulhu, it is a very interesting story, because it's not exactly the character, doing stuff per se. He's not like going on this grand adventure to unlock secrets. He's more of like, uncovering like his uncle's box that he had given to him after death, in which he finds like a Cthulhu statue. He finds manuscripts. He finds diaries, newspaper articles. And he was like, what the heck was this guy into? And we learn more about the Cthulhu cult. We learn more about Cthulhu. We learn about the Norwegians fighting the lost sea of Relais and their encounters with Cthulhu. Relais. Thank you. And their encounters with Cthulhu, and by the end of it, he has lost his innocence, and now he's always paranoid about a Cthulhu cult being out to get him, and how fragile and maddening the world actually is. And I really do like something.
I'm going to quote the story here because it's very it's very haunting. As you said a moment ago, as my uncle went, as poor Johansson went, so shall I go. I know too much, and the cult still lives.
Yeah.
Cthulhu still lives too, I suppose, again in that chasm of stone which has shielded him since the sun was young.
Yeah, and that is kind of like the perfect metaphor for the death of innocence, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. He will always be looking over his shoulder. It's twofold, I think. He will always be looking over his shoulder the rest of his life because out of fear of the cult itself. And then there's now the fear of the revelation that something like Cthulhu exists. And now, everything he thought about his place in the universe is wrong. It's wrong. He's truly insignificant. And any moment Cthulhu, when the stars are right, Cthulhu will rise up from Relais and, extinguish humanity.
Yeah, and I think my favorite scene though in the story is when the Norwegians try to ram in Cthulhu's head, and depending on who you ask, what happens, because I don't think it's very clear what happens in the story, but from some videos I've watched, it sounds like they did damage to Cthulhu's head with their steam powered ship, and it turned into jelly. But that didn't kill him and didn't injure him at all. It's just that it started pulling himself back together, and then he's just simply went back to his island. And that kind of shows you that an entity like Cthulhu is not like some kind of like Kraken. He's a spawn of the stars, and you can't exactly just kill it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people point out that how is Cthulhu, so powerful, when he was done in, or at least pushed back by a steamer. But we need to remember that, this is the 1920s. So, as far, in Lovecraft's time, one of the most powerful inventions mankind has ever produced is the steam, a steam ship, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, if it was a nuke, it would still have the idea is it will still have the same, the same result.
I think
the most powerful thing man can produce is nothing compared to the great old ones.
Yeah, and even if a nuke were to like splatter Cthulhu everywhere, he would just pull himself back together. It's not something you can just get rid of.
At least not by human means, anyway. And in the Lovecraft mythos, human means is normally cosmic means that will make you go mad anyway.
Yeah, like trying to read a passage out of the Necronomicon, the next thing you know, you have tentacles spewing out your mouth.
Yeah, pretty much.
And, even though I haven't finished this particular story from beginning to end, I think Shadow over Innsmouth is also a very cool story to read about. And if I can just make a mark, Warhammer 40k, sure. The Gene Stealer cult, that's pure Innsmouth.
Yeah, it's pure Innsmouth. It's pure Innsmouth, it's the horror of discovering, it's the horror of yourself in a way, because, you haven't finished reading, so I will not say anything.
Oh, no, it's like, I know what happens.
It's the horror of finding...
Oh, no, I know what happens in the story, so...
Okay. It's the horror of yourself, and, I suppose it's kind of like the horror of becoming something inhuman, or, finding out that the people that, people around you are, not who they say they are.
I would make the argument that it does kind of like show the body horror when it comes to something like Cthulhu or Dagon's influence within people. Because even in Call of Cthulhu, him awakening gave people horrible dreams. But with the Innsmouth people, they started physically mutating, becoming more and more like fish as they get older. And when they're old enough,
they started breeding with those things as well.
Yeah, and when they're ready, they simply go back into the ocean. And
I'm sure that Badger would enjoy that. Hey, he's the one that calls himself the monster fucker, so...
Oh, God, I can imagine. And it does actually make you think, though, like how numerous are the deep ones within the ocean and just how many eyes look upon the surface world. And it's like, that's frightening. That's a frightening idea.
Yeah. Like, it's a frightening idea as well because, with Cthulhu has a cult and will someday rise up from relay and, destroy, extinguish humanity.
Mm-hmm.
With the deep ones, it's like they're slowly building, inserting themselves into the human, genome by interbreeding with us. So, like, what's the end game there? It's literally the Gene Stealer playbook of, eventually have so many of them that they will be able to rise up and take the planet or something like that.
I imagine so. And maybe I'm getting this confused. Are deep ones Cthulhu or are deep ones like a people?
Deep ones are the people, are the fish people that the people of Innsmouth interbreed with. The deep ones, they're called.
Yeah, I think Dagon is in that story is a deep one, isn't he? Because he is basically a giant fish. I think
he's the lead. He's either the leader of the deep ones or the god that they worship. Like the deep ones are not cosmic gods like Cthulhu is. Dagon's supposed to be one.
Yeah, but they do also worship Cthulhu.
Oh yeah, probably. Mm-hmm. Being tied to the sea and everything.
Right, and that's the thing, isn't it? Lovecraft had a thing about fish. It bothered him.
Yeah, he had he actually had a deep fear of the ocean,
mm-hmm.
And as far as I know it, that, thalassophobia, the fear of the ocean, it's becoming more and more common lately.
Yeah, because...
Thanks to him, I think.
Yeah, because, we explored more of space than we did the ocean. That's a scary thought, isn't it? Like, I'm pretty sure Brûlé is really down there.
Yeah, pretty much. Thalassophobia is an intense and persistent fear of large bodies of water, such as oceans, seas, and lakes. Can also include fear of the vastness of the sea, waves, aquatic animals, and being far from land. Yeah, I think that the sea translated his whole idea of, the infinite vastness, the horror at the infinite vastness of the cosmos pretty well, because the ocean is, like that, but local in a way.
Exactly, yeah. And it really does give a pleasing aesthetic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does.
And, this is not actually a technically part of the Lovecraftian mythos, but it is something of Lovecraft. And, actually, no, it is part of the Cthulhu mythos, but it's not technically a god, but it's a entity or something. It's a color out of space. And that's the next story I want to talk about, color out of space. That's
one of my favorites, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I find the idea of the idea of a creature made, that's a creature made of light that starts feeding on the land around it, pretty fascinating. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's kind of like always a staple of, it has become a staple of, to give something, a bit of cosmic horror, saying like, light started coming from there in a color that doesn't exist. Actually, they use that in Warhammer a lot, like when describing the warp in colors that did not exist, swirling colors that did not exist that will make you go mad, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. And yeah, I really like the idea that this thing, this globule from a meteorite that struck the farmer's land. The movie's depicted as like a pinkish color, but in the book, but of course the book version, it's this weird, indescribable color that they can't really comprehend, and I find that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very interesting concept. It's also very random. Like literally a meteor just falls in their front yard, and their doom is their doom is nigh then.
Well, that kind of shows the randomness of space, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. There's another story that I like very much. It's kind of one of his lesser known stories called The Outsider. Have you heard of it?
It sounds familiar. What's that one?
Okay. The Outsider is about it's one of his more gothic style stories.
Okay.
It basically it's about this man. The story's in first person. It's about this man that lives in a very lonely and miserable life, and he has never made contact with another person. He lives in a dark and decaying castle amid a forest.
Oh, I know.
Out the light. Yeah.
I know this one. Is this the one where near the end he touches the glass and sees himself as a ghoul?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that one. That was good.
That's the horror of the self right there. That's the horror of the self.
Yeah, that's like something out of Poe, and I love it. And
it reminds me a lot of Poe.
Yeah, and I think it was trying to be Poe in his earlier career before embracing like octopuses.
Embracing hentai.
There's Cthulhu parodies in Japan, probably. Well, there is.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. Like,
Fuck. Fuck it. Talking about Dunwich horror, if I may say that.
Yeah.
With the gifs I made on the tweet once, where it's like this, basically the plot of Dunwich horror: tentacles and stuffing a donut.
Someone, watched too much hentai.
It's like, what? The guy needed some gold.
Dunwich horror, it always seems to me like kind of strange in a way, not because it's a bad story, not at all, not because it's a bad story, but it's strange because it kind of shows like heroes triumphing over the creatures of the cosmos in a way, and I always felt like that's kind of like not in line with the mood of the rest of the mythos, because canonically, as declared by Lovecraft itself, humanity goes extinct. Like, we're reading stories about people that are all dead.
All right. Though I really do actually like Dunwich horror, where you can almost read it as like a role-playing game.
Yeah. In fact, that's what they were thinking when they made the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. They literally include a printed version of the Dunwich horror inside the books, so you can take inspiration of this is the normal structure of a Call of Cthulhu adventure.
Yeah, because because they literally started getting up gear to what's it called? I think it's like this space powder to help like expose the invisible creature. And with the one guy reading off the Necronomicon and the other guy with a shotgun.
Yeah. I love that. The wizard, the alchemist, and the guy with the shotgun.
It's like, well, you need the tank.
Yeah, you need the tank. Yeah, you do need him.
And also sorry. Can I finish this?
Yeah, sure.
And also, I really do like the whole point of why Wilford Whitley like gave his star out to Yogg-Sothoth is not because he wanted to end the world or complete a cult ritual, but it's because he needed some gold, or he wanted some gold.
the banality of evil, I suppose. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a mundane motivation, but then again, most people would have motivations like that.
Yeah, and creepy selling out your daughter to an octopus gun.
Yeah, I mean, that's fucked up, but it's kind of like even a cosmic joke. You have this super powerful godlike entity. You could ask from it, a number of things, like immortality, knowledge, that sort of thing. And the thing that you ask for is gold.
Yeah, you very shiny rock that's not really that valuable in any other industry besides the idea of wealth.
Yeah.
What is more rare actually is of worth though is platinum.
Yep. You gotta ask for platinum.
I would say that I think it would make a great miniseries for HBO.
Yeah, it could. Honestly, Lovecraft, changing a bit the subject, Lovecraft, funnily enough, is for some reason it's been called notoriously difficult to adapt to movies and TV. Things with Lovecraftian elements in it, they always sell. But actual, adaptations of his work, like word for word, very difficult. They are always, the tone, it's kind of difficult to, apparently the tone, the mood is not that easy to pin down, apparently.
Yeah, and the same thing can also apply to video games. It's something tricky to kind of do. I just think maybe it's because it's in inexperienced hands when it comes to doing something like Lovecraft, or maybe something to do with that. Yeah, and I was going to mention this when we were talking about Color Out of Space, but I'm going to mention it right now. The Nicolas Cage film is okay. I don't get why people hate it.
Oh, people hate that?
Supposedly, and I'm like, wow, this is great. You guys actually hate this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not Oscar. Well, fuck the Oscars. Who cares about the Oscars?
Who cares about what the Oscars think?
Yeah, who cares what the Oscars think? But it's not a masterpiece by any means, but it's it's decent. It's a popcorn flick, if anything else. It's better than most of the things we've gotten that adapt Lovecraft.
Yeah, and I really do like what they do with like this globule. Like, yes, and it warps the environment around them, but also warps reality, like time. So that's why it explains why they just don't leave, is because, well, 1 minute for them can be like 3 hours.
Yeah.
I really like that.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I mean,
also the sun being
that's a very
also the scene of the son being warped to his mom. It's like, oh, that's gross.
Oh yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was great. That was some peak cosmic horror mutation over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. No, I liked it when I saw it. I mean, it's better than other things we've gotten.
Also, but
you
wait,
know
I just
you know what gets Lovecraft's mood very well that you and I both like a lot?
What?
The Thing.
And that's quote unquote, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
John Carpenter, if he was in his prime, I think he would have done a great Lovecraft story into a movie. I think he would have been the best guy for it.
Isn't he still directing stuff?
I don't know. I thought he was retired.
Has he retired?
Like the guy's like old.
Yeah, I know that he's old. He's like 90 something. I'm gonna John Carpenter. I'm gonna look for that. Hold on.
But what's interesting though is that the Thing, based off the story, who goes there, that actually came out a few years after one of Lovecraft's famous stories and one of my actual absolute favorites, and it's At the Mountains of Madness.
Oh, that's great. That one's great. I love, the thing that I like the most about Mountains of Madness is the whole thing that it's in an expedition on the, a distant part of the world. Carpenter is 77.
Okay.
Okay. I mean,
But-
he still has time.
But anyways, you were saying?
Oh yeah, I love the expedition into a distant place, on a lost civilization, that sort of thing. That I like that pulp aspect of it. I love it very much about Mountains of Madness.
Yeah, and that's basically like the grandfather to Who Goes There, the thing. And it's really cool. I don't think the author said he was and got the influence from that, but it is interesting to know that At the Mountains came before Who Goes There. And yeah, you can see, I think maybe John Carpenter said too that he got some inspiration from that when creating the movie.
Yeah, I mean the DNA of the DNA of Mountains of Madness is all over the thing, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the author of Who Goes There said that he didn't take inspiration from that, but and I don't want to call anyone a liar, but that's kind of hard to believe, at times,
Well, coincidence can happen because
coincidence can happen, sure, but it's one hell of a coincidence. So just saying.
no. When you hear one hell of a coincidence, I don't know the guy who wrote Berserk, right? But someone did approach him and ask, so
Taro Mura.
yeah, so what's Guts inspired by the German knight named Gutz, Gutz, who had a metallic arm? And he was like, I've never heard of this person my entire life.
Huh, I didn't know that that was a thing. Like, I thought that he was based off them, but
yeah, I thought so too. But
okay, cool. Yeah, coincidence. Yeah, okay.
If I were to make a comment about At the Mountains, I love the designs for the elder things.
Oh yeah,
yeah, like cucumbers.
The Shogun.
Shoggoths are basically
the most
just plasma.
Yeah, but what I like about the Shoggoth is that it's the most Lovecraft creature that ever Lovecraft. Massive slime and tentacles and mouths and eyes,
Oh, it's a boy.
You fucking idiot.
Oh, what?
Yeah, me say.
But no, let me make the argument for the elder things. Right? Cucumbers with wings and starfishes for heads. What I liked about Lovecraft and his later works is that he went, actually describing the cosmic horror instead of just saying they're indescribable. It gives more character actually explaining what they look like instead of just, saying it's indescribable. Because that kind of makes something to tease about you later on when you do it multiple times.
It sounds like a cop-out. Like, I understand. Although Lovecraft did sometimes rely a lot on the, it's too horrible to even describe, a lot. But, there are parts when he gives us enough information to make ourselves a picture in our heads about what the hell the characters are seeing, and leave out enough stuff to... leave the indescribable horror part. The aura, the mood intact.
Right. And also I got the manga version of At the Mountain, so I can't wait to finish that. And, on YouTube, I found this like Dr. Zeus parody of At the Mountains of Madness, and it's pretty awesome.
Dr. Zeus parody.
Yeah, so someone turned, At the Mountains of Madness into like a Dr. Zeus picture book. It's awesome. Rhymes and everything. It's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, we couldn't talk about more of his stories, but, that would go on for like hours because he really did create a lot of cool stuff. But yeah, Lovecraft is immortalized like Tolkien, I would argue, and he has as much influence as compared to him when it comes to, the influence of his works and what his works would inspire other people to create. And maybe one day you and me and Badger can try out the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be happy to. I mean, Badger and I have the books and expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Yeah, and I'll always be down for a role playing game. Oh, you want me to read Lovecraft's eulogy for Howard?
Let's do it.
In memoriam, Robert Erwin Howard. The sudden unexpected death on June 11, 1936 of Robert Erwin Howard, author of fantastic tales of incomparable vividness, forms weird fiction's worst lost since the passing of Henry S. Whitehead 4 years ago. Mr. Howard, born at Peaster, Texas on January 22, 1906, and was old enough to have seen the last phase of the Southwestern pioneering the settlement of the Great Plains and lower Rio Grande Valley, and the spectacular rise of the oil industry in the rockiest boom towns. His father, who survives him, was one of the pioneer physicians of the region. The family have lived in South, East, and West Texas and Western Oklahoma for the last few years at Cross Plains near Brownwood, Texas. Steeped in the frontier atmosphere, Mr. Howard early became a devotee of its virile Homeric traditions. His knowledge of its history and folkways was profound. The descriptions and reminiscences contained in his private letters illustrate the eloquence and power with which he would have celebrated it in literature had he lived longer. Mr. Howard's family is of distinguished southern planter stock of Scotch-Irish descent, with most ancestors settled in Georgia and North Carolina in the 18th century. Beginning to write at 15, Mr. Howard placed his first story 3 years later while a student at Howard Payne College in Brownwood. The story, Spear and Fang, was published in Weird Tales for July 1925. Wider fame came with the appearance of the novelette Wolf's Head in the same magazine in April 1926. In August 1928 began the tales dealing with Solomon Kane, an English Puritan of relentless dueling and wrong-redressing proclivities, whose adventures took him to strange parts of the world, including the shadow-haunted ruins of unknown and primordial cities in the African jungle. With these tales, Mr. Howard struck what proved to be one of his most effective accomplishments, the description of vast megalithic cities of the Elder World, around whose dark towers and labyrinthine nether vaults clings the aura of pre-human fear and necromancy which no other writer could duplicate. These tales also mark Mr. Howard's development of that skill and zest depicting sanguinary conflict, which became so typical of his work. Solomon Kane, like several other heroes of the author, was conceived in boyhood long before incorporation in any story. Always keen to student of Celtic antiquities and other phases of remote history, Mr. Howard began in 1929 with the Shadow Kingdom. In the August Weird Tales, that succession of tales of the prehistoric world, for which he soon grew so famous. The earlier specimens describes a very distant age in man's history, when Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu were above the waves, and when the shadows of pre-human reptile men rested upon the primal scene. Of these, the central figure was King Cole of Valusia. In Weird Tales for December 1932 appeared The Phoenix on the Sword. First of those tales of King Conan the Cimmerian, which introduced a later prehistoric world, a world perhaps 15,000 years ago, just before the first faint glimmerings of recorded history. The elaborate extent of and accurate self-consistency with which Mr. Howard developed this world of Conan in his later stories is well known to all fantasy readers. For his own guidance, he prepared a detailed quasi-historical sketch of infinite cleverness, imaginative fertility, now running in the Fantagraph as a serial undertitle, The Hyborian Age. Meanwhile, Mr. Howard had written many tales of the early Picts and Celts, including a notable series revolving around the chieftain Bran Mac Morn. Few readers will ever forget the hideous and compelling power of that macabre masterpiece, Worms of the Earth, in Weird Tales for November 1932. Other powerful fantasies lay outside the connected series, these including the memorable serial Skullface and a few distinctive tales with a modern setting, such as the recent Black Canaan, with its genuine regional background and its clutchingly compelling picture of the horror that stalks through the moss-hung, shadow-cursed, serpent-ridden swamps of the American far south. Outside the fantasy field, Mr. Howard was surprisingly prolific and versatile. A strong interest in sports, a thing perhaps connected with his love of primitive conflict and strength, led him to create the prize-fighting hero Sailor Steve Costigan. His adventures in distant and curious parts delighted the readers of many magazines to the utmost mastery of romantic swashbuckling, while his increasingly frequent tales of Western life, such as the Breckenridge Elkins series, showed his growing ability and inclination to reflect the backgrounds with which he was directly familiar. Mr. Howard's poetry, weird, warlike, and adventurous, was no less notable than his prose. It had the due spirit of the ballad and the epic, and was marked by a pulsing rhythm and potent imagery of extremely distinctive cast. Much of it, in the form of supposed quotations from ancient writings, served to head the chapters of his novels. It is regrettable that no one published a collection that has ever appeared, and that no one hopes that such a thing may be posthumously edited and issued. The character and attainments of Mr. Howard were wholly unique. He was, above everything else, a lover of the simpler, older world of barbarian and pioneering days, when courage and strength took the place of subtlety and stratagem, and when a hardy, fearless race battled and bled and asked no quarter from hostile nature. All his stories reflect this philosophy, and derive from it a vitality found in few of his contemporaries. No one could write more convincingly of violence and gore than he, and his battle passages reveal an instinctive aptitude for military tactics which would have brought him distinction in times of war. His real gifts were higher than the readers of his published work could expect, and had he lived, would have helped him make his mark in serious literature with some folk epic of his beloved Southwest. It is hard to describe precisely what made Mr. Howard's stories stand out so sharply, but the real secret is that he himself was in every one of them, whether they were ostensibly commercial or not. He was greater than any profit-making policy he could adopt. Or even when he outwardly made concessions to mammon-guided editors and commercial critics, he had an internal force and sincerity which broke through the surface and put the imprint of his personality on everything he wrote. Seldom, if he ever, did he set down a lifeless stock character or situation and leave it as such. Before he concluded with it, it always took on some tinge of vitality and reality in spite of popular editorial policy. Always drew from something that his own experience and knowledge of life instead from sterile herbarium and desiccated pulpish standbys. Not only did he excel in pictures of strife and slaughter, but he almost alone in his ability to create real emotions of spectral fear and dread suspense. No author, even in the humblest fields, can truly excel unless he takes his work very seriously. And Mr. Howard did just that, even in cases where he consciously thought he did not. Such genuine artists should perish while hundreds of insincere hacks continue to concoct spurious ghosts and vampires and spaceships and occult detectives is indeed a sorry piece of cosmic irony. Mr. Howard, familiar with many phases of southwestern life, lived with his parents in semi-rural setting in the village of Cross Plains, Texas. Writing was his sole profession. His tastes were reading were wide and included historical research of notable depth in fields as dissimilar as the American Southwest, prehistoric Great Britain and Ireland, and the prehistoric Oriental and African world. In literature, he preferred the virile to the subtle, and repudiated modernism with sweeping completeness. The late Jack London was one of his idols. He was a liberal in politics and a bitter foe of civic injustice in every form. His leading amusements were sports and travel, the latter always giving rise to delightful descriptive letters replete with historical reflections. Humor was not his specialty, though he had on the one hand a keen sense of irony, and on the other hand an abundant fund of heartiness, cordiality, and conviviality. Though having numerous friends, Mr. Howard belonged to no literary clique and abhorred all cults of arty affectation. His admirations ran towards strength of character and body rather than towards scholastic prowess. With his fellow authors in the fantasy field, he corresponded interestingly and voluminously, but never met more than one of them, the gifted E. Hoffman Price, whose buried attainments impressed him profoundly in person. Mr. Howard was nearly 6 feet in height, with his with the with the massive build of a born fighter. He was, save for Celtic blue eyes, very dark, and in later years his weight averaged around 195. Always a disciple of hearty and strenuous living, he suggested more than casually his own most famous character, the intrepid warrior, adventurer, and Caesar of Thrones, Conan the Cimmerian. His loss at the age of 30 is a tragedy of the first magnitude, and a blow from which fantasy fiction will not recover. Mr. Howard's library has been presented to Howard Payne College, where it will form the nucleus of the Robert E. Howard Memorial Collection of books, manuscripts, and letters. H.P. Lovecraft.
That's really cool, and that's something we don't really get to see the side of Lovecraft for. And despite some efforts, I think, from people to try to like make Lovecraft to be like this ghoul on Earth, he really does show that he does care for his friends. He does care for the field of writing, and that he is not just this, bitter human being who hated humanity. Even though his parents were put into asylums, and even if he didn't get like the best, cards in life, he unfortunately didn't, play his hand well in life, especially towards his wife, who they had to get a divorce about. He was a flawed man, but I want to think he did the best he could with what he could understand, especially with a mad world that we can live in.
Yeah, I agree. The fact that he took time to reflect on his life, to kind of like come to this conclusion, like, wow, like maybe I was an ass, maybe I was wrong about this, shows a level of introspection and self-awareness that, a lot of people do not even have today,
They almost refuse to have. It's like,
yeah,
no, I'm a perfect human being. I'm never wrong. And it's like, well,
I call myself the good guy squad, so I'm the good guy.
And then comes the question of, well, what is good? Or it's like,
yeah,
it's a nothing burger statement to say these days. Or it's a very childish sense of religion or dogma, where it's just be good, don't be bad.
Yeah. But according to what? Mr. Lovecraft was an atheist, but we don't care about that. Hope God rest his soul.
And, I will be interested to talking about Conan one day, because I want to learn about him, and I think it would be interesting to do an episode about that.
You really do not, have experienced Pulp Fiction without experience with Lovecraft and experiencing Howard. And, it's strange that, because they're so different, like they're polar opposites. With Solomon Kane and Conan, it's what I recommend, honestly. Lovecraft was of the opinion that, Robert E. Howard's best character was Solomon Kane.
Mm-hmm. And I can't wait to learn more about him. And with that, actually, this concludes our episode. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and activating the bells to never miss an episode. And we'll see you all in the next one. Have a great day, guys.
Adios.